Welcome to Thursdays at the Museum. I'm Ian Rapnicki, a Community Engagement Manager with the DIA. And I'd like to start by thanking the residents of Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne counties for your generous millage support. That support provides free general admission for Tri-County residents, free school field trips, community programs, and specialty programming for adults 55 and older, which includes free bus transportation to the museum. Today, we'll be visiting the studio of stained glass artist Gina Ferrara. And if you'd like to ask a question during today's program, you can do so by making sure you're signed into your YouTube account if you're watching on YouTube, and you can leave a comment there. Or if you're watching on Facebook, you can leave a public comment there as well. And your questions will be fielded by today's host, DIA Studio Coordinator Zach Freeling. And let's just get to the visit with Gina and Zach. Hey.
Thanks, Ian.
Hi, thanks, Ian.
Hi, Gina. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Zach?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to look at your work and talk about it a bit more.
Thank
and
you
let's just
for
get our
having me.
first slide up here. So here are two examples of your work, just to kind of kick things off. I thought these were really nice. Just kind of showstoppers, just really interesting, a lot going on. While we have these up for people to kind of admire, can you just tell us a bit about yourself, how you got started, what your technique is exactly?
Definitely. I grew up in New Jersey, and I became a stained glass artist because an online friend was looking for an assistant, and she was a third generation glass artist. And she said, I'd like to teach you how to make stained glass if you can help me with my website. And I said, absolutely. It sounded like the deal of a century. I had to drive to Brooklyn. I was living at the Jersey Shore at the time. So about a 2-hour drive twice a week to help her out. And, she taught me little by little along the way, passing down that generational knowledge that, she had. And I felt so lucky to have it as well. So I worked with her for a couple of years. She ended up moving away, and I started making things on my own.
Wow. So about how long have you been at this practice?
I started about 10 years ago, but full-time now, just a few years, about 3 years or so.
Okay,
I was a sign maker, sign painter, and design for Whole Foods Market, traveling and opening stores for them. And that was about 5 years of my life. While I was doing stained glass, I was doing that too, and then decided to focus in on this.
Oh, wow. That's great. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your designs and where they come from? We'll look at a few more coming up where we see some references to music logos and different types of illustration and quilting. So there's kind of a variety.
This one in particular came straight from a Catholic painting, the Sacred Heart. This is the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which has got the roses and the sword coming through. Growing up Catholic, I kind of saw these beautiful images and scary images sometimes, and thought that they would just translate so well into stained glass because it's been such a traditional medium in the church for so long, but didn't want to go that traditional route. I can show you an example of the traditional style of this image. This is from an old church. A friend of mine was redoing some of the windows there, and they had taken this piece out. You can see this is different from what I do because this is painted and etched onto the glass. This is a solid piece of glass. Show you the back. It's painted directly on, etched directly on, and then fired in a kiln. So it's different from what I do, but similar design style there.
Oh, that's great. What sort of paint is used? Is it similar to like a ceramic glaze? Or?
They use oil enamels that they fire in the kiln. They also use like glass frit, which is finely ground glass, and they fire that on in the kiln, so it is permanent.
Okay, cool. It seems like that. I mean, just we're only 2 slides in, but it seems like already noticing a theme of mixing the traditional with contemporary, even the way you got started with it. You mentioned, an online friend needed help with the website, and that led to, it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition there.
I appreciate that these things have been around for so long, and they stick around for a reason. These images are so classic and solid, and they're easily recognized from far away, and they just kind of glow. They're special to me in a lot of ways. And I think, the tattoos that I have and the things I have in my studio, those traditional images just play a big role in my inspiration and in my day-to-day life.
So I think you kind of touched on it a bit, but you mentioned you were a sign painter, which there's, probably some similarities there to the glass in terms of form and
Mhm.
stark lines and some of the imagery and, having to kind of boil things down to their basic shapes.
Yeah.
But what is it about glass that kind of kept you at it for 10 years?
I love stained glass because of how uh, whatever you decide to do, you can make it in that moment. So there's no waiting, there's no drying time, there's no processing time. For this style of stained glass, there's no kiln time. And I just find it so interesting that whatever you set your mind to, you can kind of make it happen, and as fast as you can make it happen. So a piece like this, you can start it in the morning and finish it at night if you wanted to. I think that instant gratification is what really draws me to the medium.
Yeah, I can see that being really appealing. Some of the, especially when you get into the glass with and you'll have to, help me find the vocabulary, but some of the glass with the more really interesting textures or patterns or speckles,
Yeah.
just some of that.
I can show you some of that actually. I
Oh,
get
yeah.
inspired by the medium a lot of times, and these two are examples of hand-blown Fremont glass, which is,
Wow.
you make this on the West Coast, and it only comes, they hand make it, so the sheets that they sell are very small, and that is so inspiring to me. Something like this is a rondelle, which is just hand-blown glass in a circle. It seems simple, but it takes a very specific talent to do that. The glass blowers that have been doing it for hundreds of years, they've been using these in churches and cathedrals, and these same materials have been around forever, and they're just adapting and growing as the technology advances.
Yeah. Where do you source most of your glass from?
I
Or is there
source
one place?
in Lansing, there's a big warehouse called Delphi, and they sell lots of modern equipment and sheets of stained glass and architectural glass. But I prefer to find it through older artists who are retiring, or they decide to offload some of their supply, because these things like that I just showed you they're hard to come by, and a lot of the glass they stopped making as environmental standards changed and as factory standards changed. So the mirror that you see in this piece, they no longer make that. So it's been challenging to find special materials. It's getting harder and harder, but estate sales and flea markets and places like that, there you find the hidden gems.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, that even just kind of makes each piece, more unique and special in its own way then.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I was going to say the immediacy thing, some of these, I guess because you mentioned kiln, some of it reminds me a bit of ceramics as well when you're using, these glazes that are drawing from nature and providing these really brilliant colors. But with that, there's always the drying time and waiting time and firing time. And I can see it being really appealing to just, here's a nice piece of glass, going to cut it up and make something right away, and it's there.
Absolutely.
How long? So you said could complete this in about a day, you think?
Hour-wise, I'd say this piece I probably finished in 2 days. Started it in the morning one day, finished it the following day.
Wow.
But for bigger pieces, it just depends on each individual piece. This one is pretty simple, but more complicated pieces can take days and weeks, and it just depends on the size of the glass, the size of the piece. Yeah, so it is a very intensive process, lots of steps, but it is, you could finish it. There's no waiting time.
That's great. Here's another a little bit of a larger one. This one looks about a foot or so in diameter, I would guess.
This one is about between 16 and 18 inches in diameter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it's pretty large.
Yeah. What would you say is the largest you've done?
I've done a few 3 foot by 3 foot windows, 2 foot by 3 foot, some transom windows for friends' shops and things like that.
Cool.
And they're a little hard to transport, but they're the same technique. They're the same. They just need a little more reinforcing.
Okay. And back to the imagery and, speaking of tradition and things
Mhm.
you were mentioning before, that this is actually design that came from a
Yeah,
book. Can you speak a little bit about that? Sort of this
absolutely.
tradition of, reusing designs and how
Yeah.
that plays
So,
into your style?
like most mediums, these pattern books exist, and they get passed down from artist to artist. I actually got this from a local artist here. They don't make this book anymore. It's so fun to take a pattern and adapt it to the materials you have, the size you want, what your customer might want. So it's been really fun to kind of explore those patterns and with different colors. I've made that wizard twice now, and both times it's something totally different, and it's a lot of fun to do that. And then that rose that I just made actually came from, this is the State Flowers book, which is an older one, but you can see I take those designs and then you can adapt them to your liking. And I think that's a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah, there's something that seems like, again, going to that traditional versus contemporary, also, taking these patterns and plans, and there's something almost sort of architectural about it, but then you're using this, ultimately a natural material and making these natural forms,
Yeah.
and then also, playing with light and space, and
Oh yeah.
there's a lot
It's
of
it's the most fun feeling when you've cut all your pieces, you've soldered them all together, and you hold that piece up for the first time and seeing the light come through it is it's magical. It's really a thrill.
that's great.
Yeah.
And speaking of, tradition and patterns, a lot of your pieces, maybe not a lot, but a fair amount,
Yeah.
had this sort of a quilt look to it,
Mhm.
which is something that's really fun too, going off of these traditional um,
I really like the quilts
designs.
of G's Bend, which is a group of quilters in Alabama, and
Mhm.
I find that they're just there's so much beauty in the asymmetry and the colors, and just everything that's going on in those quilts is so appealing to me, and a lot of that folk art inspires my glasswork, and all of these are made by hand. All of my patterns are hand drafted, and I find that there's a lot of beauty in the imperfection of, you know, I'm using a ruler, but I'm not using a computer to make it exact. I'm using a square, but it's so fun to just see those little imperfections, those little
Mhm.
differences that it can't be reproduced by a machine. And the same goes back to those quilts. It's just there's nothing like it.
Yeah, and you're cutting the pieces by hand,
Hmm. Yeah.
so then it's going to be a little different. And I would imagine too, going back to you were saying you like to source things from estate sales or flea markets or hand-me-down glass. So that seems like it ties in as well to this idea of using what scraps you have to make something, and not just
Yep.
having it be so uniform.
Yep. Yep. You might have a 2 by 2 inch piece of glass that I've had on the shelf for a couple of years now, and making something like this, I finally have the perfect spot for it, and that's a great feeling.
Nice. Yeah, this one is just really, really beautiful, and all the different types of glass and the light
Thank
shining through.
you. I like playing with how the light comes through and how it really makes the rainbow refractions in your room and the sparkles, and that's really important to me is how it plays off of the place you put it depending on the time of the day, depending on this whether the sun's out or not. It makes such a huge difference, and I think it's so much fun. It's like you have two different pieces of art in your house.
Yeah, I was noticing that when I was looking at the photos, it seems like it's so interesting. Which on this one, that's kind of why we put two on here. It's so different depending on how the light is, and yeah, that does seem very fun throughout the day. Kind of seeing the way it changes and transforms as the
Absolutely.
light comes through. You also had some smaller quilt squares, and I believe this is tied into. You also are teaching some classes at the Michigan Folk School. Can you talk a little bit about
Absolutely.
that process? What those classes look like? What the school is like?
Yeah, last November, I began teaching classes at the folk school, the Michigan Folk School. It's in Dixboro, right outside of Ann Arbor. And it was started by two folks who wanted to pass down traditions to their kids. They wanted to raise chickens, but they didn't want to watch a YouTube video on how to process them, and organic gardening and herbalism and lots of things that you just can't learn from a YouTube video. They wanted to have a hands-on school and a hands-on place to learn. And so one of the founders of the school was teaching stained glass that she had learned from her mom. And she wanted to focus on some other things. So they were looking for a teacher. And I had actually emailed them asking to take classes at the school, and they said, would you like to teach one? And so it kind of went from there. And since November, because the school is so small right now, they're expanding as we speak, but there's one classroom. So month by month, they change out the focus. So in November, we focused on stained glass. And this month, they might be doing leather working. The next month, they might be doing hat making. So they have a full-time blacksmith studio there. There's so many interesting things to learn. And, these traditional crafts that are here because they've been passed down, and we just want to keep passing them down so people can keep enjoying them. And also that they keep making these materials because they are getting harder to find. So the more people we can bring into the craft, the more demand for those materials there will be.
Yeah, that's great. Have you had a chance to take any classes there in other mediums?
I haven't yet. I'm very interested in taking a few. I've actually, I forgot that I took a pine needle basket weaving class, which was incredible. That was so much fun. You take these long pine needles from Georgia and weave them into little baskets. And, it's the same with stained glass. You can make a little piece like this. You can make a huge basket to carry your groceries in. And
wow,
it's a lot of fun.
That's cool. I'm going to have to look into that. That's great.
Yeah, they teach lots of classes year round. So it's a great place to learn. They're all about community building and introducing people to each other. We all eat lunch together, and it's a great place to learn.
That's great. And so you said you do have some stained glass classes coming up there later this year?
In November, I have them scheduled, but I may have to postpone because we're expecting a baby in the end of October. So we may postpone them until February of the following year. But we'll keep it posted on the website. They have a great website where we update all the classes. Everything is online. We can, everything is great on their website.
Yeah. And congrats on that too, by the
Thank
way.
you. Thanks a lot.
Let's step back a little bit, speaking of tradition and this technique, and let's look at a few pieces of stained glass from the DIA's collection that you can view if you come to the museum. So this is a Frank Lloyd Wright window, which is on display in the spine and the modern wing from 1904. While we have this up, can you just say a little bit, Gina, about the history of stained glass and maybe some of the different movements or
absolutely
what it like?
Stained glass had originated in the church as a way to tell stories without having to read anything. So people who couldn't read, they can come and look at the windows and read the stories, but with the images. And this beauty was so attractive that it would be, it'd be hard to take your eyes off of them. Frank Lloyd Wright, he was inspired by the Japanese design styles and influences that he had. And he had this idea of making a light screen. So it wasn't to hide the light and keep the light out. It was to bring more light in and play with that light. I believe they made it all in-house, their stained glass. I could be mistaken, but most of theirs was just directly, they did everything in-house. And again, it's just, I really admire his work because the way the light plays with those glasses, it's just something that can't be seen in photos. So going to see it at the museum is really special because you get to see how the light plays with the glass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is, this one is so precise and impressive too. You mentioned, with yours, it's measured by hand and not a computer. And like, this is 1904. So it's, very impressive.
And something different with Frank Lloyd Wright's work is that he uses the traditional method of lead cane, which is strips of lead with channels for each piece of glass. The strip of lead is shaped like an H, and basically you fit 2 pieces of glass in that channel.
Oh.
So how my work differs is it's the Tiffany method of stained glass, which uses copper foil, and that the way that originated was they took a piece of copper foil and beeswax and stuck it to the edge of the glass.
Oh, wow.
And that would give the same effect. So you'd solder that rather than having the strips of lead.
Oh, okay.
And that was original. It'd be for pieces that had more natural forms, things that were more irregular. It definitely suited those pieces better. So like the Lewis Comfort Tiffany lamps with all the intricate natural shapes and flowers and trees, that they needed the copper foil for that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. And I should have mentioned, you'll be demonstrating some of your techniques in about 10 minutes or so here. You're joining us from your studio, so you'll be showing us a little bit about what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Wanted to highlight a couple other pieces. This is a stained and leaded glass piece from Henry Matisse, which, going back to a little bit about what you've been showing about taking, a quilt and make it into a window, or, designs based on other stained glass or based on tattoos or any number of things. This is a Matisse piece, clearly pretty similar to his cut paper work or ceramic tiles or some of the other things he was doing later in life.
And these blocks of color are so impactful. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, sorry.
They're just so beautiful, and they really kind of harken back to the old style of stained glass, where you have these big blocks of color, and seeing how the light shines through and plays with that during the day is really amazing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then one more, and this piece is definitely on display. This is right off of the Great Hall in the center of the museum. And this is stained glass that were formerly, which I see Tim Burke in the comments just mentioned. I have some 100-year-old glass from churches that have been burnt down or demolished in Detroit. Some is really sooty. Can I use muriatic acid to clean it? Do you have any tips on cleaning sooty glass?
I'm not familiar with that. I don't do any restoration myself, but there are still experts who can help you in that realm. I would start with simple green, and I think you can kind of, as long as you're not using any abrasive materials, you can kind of see if that helps. But as you can see with this piece here, this is an old piece, and there's still just the effects of time have shown, like there's a little bit of texture on here, and it takes a real restoration person to get that perfect again.
Yeah. And yeah, speaking of old, so this was a stained glass window that was formerly installed at the First Unitarian Church on Woodward, just north of downtown. That church is still there, but when they widened Woodward in, I think, 1944, this had to come down, and it came to the museum. So there we have what it looks like now. You can really see the scale there, and then the church, how it originally was. But can you speak a little bit about John Lafarge and his role with this technique?
Absolutely. He and Lewis Comfort Tiffany were actually, they were head to head in their techniques. And Lafarge invented opalescent glass, which is the opaque glass that we use today. And a lot of his techniques involved putting two pieces of glass on top of each other to make different colors. So rather than painting onto the glass, he would use the two pieces and use their color differences. So for example, like these, he would use as how the light came through both of them rather than them separate. He would use that as a design element rather than painting directly on the glass. And I think there's still some contention of who invented the copper foil method, which I use today. Was it Lafarge or was it Lewis Comfort Tiffany? But I would say that they were both super impactful in how we still use stained glass today.
Nice. Yeah. And I would definitely recommend checking this piece out next time you're in the museum. Anyone watching, if you haven't looked at it yet, I know I definitely want to go and look at it after today's chat. And just with all these, I feel like I'm learning so much about stained glass. I will have a newfound appreciation for it. Do you have a personal opinion on the Lafarge v. Tiffany debate?
You know what? I appreciate both of their work immensely, but I just find that Tiffany lamps were such a cool and impactful piece in architecture and interior design. And as someone who appreciates folk art and craftsmanship and just the craft, I think the Tiffany lamps have more of an impact on my personal life. But Lafarge was no question such a big influence on the medium.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And you've spoken a bit too about, not wanting to just make purely decorative things to go on a wall, but things that have sort of an experience or interactive portion. Can you say a bit more about that?
For sure. I really enjoy things that adapt to how you use them. Like I said, how we put it in a different window. The things can change depending on the light coming in. And I'm inspired by the material. So something like this is dichroic glass, and it changes as the light. You see, it's like a couple different colors all in one. And then when you put light behind it, oh, I can get that here. It's just a completely different piece of glass depending on the light. So it's so much fun to use the materials. This is a faceted glass gem, and you can just see how pretty it is. And I just like pretty stuff in the window and making beauty out of what's already there. And I think it's so much fun to use those different materials in different ways and see your reflection in them. Obviously seeing the refraction and the rainbows, and it just brings a lot of joy to me. And I think that seeing it up on the wall across your room is so much fun.
So in this one, I'm seeing some refraction in the mirror. Is that coming from these gems or these glass?
Yeah, so the light's coming from behind this mirror, and that's a dichroic gem. And so it's just like what I showed you, but it's got a coating, which gives it a color changing effect. And then the one underneath of it is one of the faceted gems that's just clear. And that when the sun comes through that, it makes rainbows like a prism on your wall.
Oh, that's really cool. Very cool. We've got a few more pieces I want to look at. This is something I've seen on your website a lot, which we will link to as well. But you've got a lot of pieces sort of using this iconography from the Grateful Dead, which I thought was really fun and cool. How did that get started? What drew you to that?
Well, the music has just been a joy to be involved in, and my partner is a big fan of the Dead, and the imagery is just iconic. You can't really beat the Steal Your Face skull and the Jerry's Dancing Bears. They're just images that have been impactful to so many people and reused and bootlegged and changed over time. And it's been a real pleasure to be able to adapt them to glass. And they change over time, but also they change depending on the time of day. And these two pieces kind of play with that. There's faceted glass gems that I actually use the Lafarge and Tiffany plating method to make these pink and blue and red gems. And in the skull you see there, so that's a piece of glass layered underneath the gem. So both of these are they've been so much fun to make for, Grateful Dead fans are some of the most enthusiastic music fans that I've ever known. So they just love to have these pieces in their home and to show off the love of that band. And it's just been a pleasure.
Yeah, and there's an interesting, you mentioned the bootlegging of the logos. That's like such a tradition in itself.
Yeah.
That this is a little different than, say, if you were just doing like a Beatles logo or something, like fans taking these logos and repurposing them and reusing them and making their own shirts, blankets, whatever for decades is such a part of that. That's like its own tradition, even independent of the music. So that kind of seems to fit in nicely with your, using the 90s fantasy imagery or the folk art quilts, or just kind of another line in that.
Yeah, it's been it's been incredible to see the outpouring of support from these fans. And the parking lot before the shows was always an iconic experience rather than the concert itself. It's all part of it, and adapting and using them, and it's just been so much fun.
That's great. Yeah, and I like just two more here, kind of taking that same basic idea and adding in different imagery.
And it's just the same little graphics, just interpreted with whatever your imagination can come up with. I've seen so many different things within this Steal Your Face skull that I've lost count. So I think I actually have a poster on my wall here that I can show you that my partner made. Nice. And that's nothing left to do but smile, smile, smile. And those are some lyrics from the band. And, used in so many different ways. It's so much fun.
It also seems similar to the quilt again, of just a kind of a good way to use any little scraps you have, show off different types of glass, different textures, different colors.
I'm a huge fan of just putting all the wild stuff together. I think that you don't really know what you're going to get. These glass pieces just have such a different personality from each other. And it's so much fun just to see what happens when you put them together.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
We've got just a few more here, just a couple more showing the refraction. You can really see here, you know, now that you pointed out, you can really see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but what the, you know, these little gem pieces are doing to the light and the way they're refracting it in different ways versus the different types of, you know, the flat colors. It's just really interesting. Just such a different, yeah, it's like a whole second life that these pieces have once they're in the sun. Like this one at the bottom, that last, like almost looks like a galaxy or something, which I wouldn't have expected just from looking at this sort of gray mauvish color as that the glass is. That's really cool.
It's really neat the way the textures of the glass, especially there's a type of glass called water glass, which is, it looks like water, and the reflections from that, which you'll see in one of the, I think you have a slide showing that coming up. You just wouldn't even guess it from, you know, the way it looks when there's not light coming through. But yeah, this is something that I just wanted to have fun with and make as many sparkles as I could, and you'd be amazed seeing how many just like explode all over your room like a disco almost. Okay, here's the water glass, this yellow glass here, and you can see that reflection is just so much different than the glass you see.
Yeah, yeah. Looking at just the object on the left, the glass looks pretty flat, but then seeing the light coming through, and then also on the right, the light,
Yeah.
or you know, looking through it to the light.
And those are the handmade rondelles in the center, and they always make kind of a fun reflection too. You don't really know what you're going to get. They're all hand blown. So.
And I would imagine as these things sway or move, if they're hanging, you know, just kind of makes infinite cool designs. Seems like a lot of fun. Cool. Well, this is our last slide, and we're at 132. So I think we're going to switch over now to our demo portion. Thank you all for joining and submitting comments. Feel free to continue submitting any questions or comments you have, and we'll get to them when we can. And yeah, I'm excited to see a little bit more how this goes.
All right. Can everyone see my workstation? Can you see my workstation here?
Yeah, perfect.
Right. So this is an example of a pattern that I used, and this is for that rose that we saw at the beginning. They're all made on tracing paper, and I can take a piece of glass and basically just trace over my pattern. Say I wanted to use this for a petal. I could just use a Sharpie and just trace that on here. So that's basically how you get your design transferred from your pattern to the glass. So instead of using this, since this is a really special piece of glass, I'm going to show an example. We're just going to do a square. Okay, so we're going to take this is a glass scorer. This is a pistol grip glass scorer. It's just got a little bit of oil in the tip and a carbide wheel there. And we're just going to line it up with our line. And it's not dangerous. You can touch it. It doesn't hurt you. It's just going to give us a score. And if you listen closely, you can hear it. Are you able to hear that at all?
Yeah.
So now we have a nice score line in our glass. We're going to take, these are running pliers. And what they do is put pressure on either side of that line. And that's just going to break the glass in two. And I'll do it one more time. We're going to cut this other piece, score it, and you could also break it by hand that way. And you're not limited to straight lines. We can cut a curve, and we can use our pliers. These are called grozing pliers, and they kind of nip off glass. You can see the curves come just as well. So once you have the glass cut, this is what we were talking about before, is the copper foil. So I can show you a piece that I've done. This is a beveled piece of glass with the copper foil around the edge. And that's the surface that the solder will stick to when we start to put our piece together. So I'm just going to show you an example. This is the copper foil that we use. It comes in all different widths. This is the 1/4 inch width, which we're going to use today. And I'll We're just going to peel the backing off, and instead of using beeswax like they did when it first started, these come sticky now, so it's like a sticker. So what we'll do is take our glass, we're going to line it up with our edge, and just wrap that copper tape around the edge of this piece. And then you can see that the tape is just kind of on there. We're going to have to burnish it. We'll use our burnishing tools. This is, I believe it's a ceramics tool that I've just used for burnishing the foil on the edge. All that means is we're just rubbing it on to make sure it's got a good adhesion to the glass. We're going to push down both sides, just like that. And then this is another burnishing tool that I have that just kind of does the same thing, but on both sides at one time. Okay. And then we'll just put it back in our piece. So we have 4 pieces copper foil together here, as you can see. And now, for safety purposes, I'm going to put on my respirator and my gloves. And now we're gonna use a mix of lead and tin to connect our pieces here. And that comes on a roll. It comes in a pound roll, so it's nice and heavy. Okay. And we're gonna use, this is acid that it's called flux, and what it does is just make sure that that solder is going to stick to our copper foil. All right, so once we have our flux, take a couple pins and pin this in place here.
What kind of a board is that you're working on?
This is called Homosoap board. It's just from Home Depot. It's a sound insulator and fire insulator, so it's fireproof. And it's nice because you can put your pins directly in there and hold your piece in place. This is our soldering iron. You can see that it's got a chisel tip there. We're going to clean it off with a wet sponge. We're going to take a drop of solder. Is that close enough? Can you see there?
I think so, yeah.
Good. And we're just going to tack our piece together. Put little drops of solder in the 4 corners just so we can have it not move at anywhere. All right. So turn the heat up on my iron a little bit and I'll show you. All right. So now we're going to put a bead of solder all along every edge. It just kind of flows and it doesn't stick to the glass. It just sticks to that copper foil.
Mm.
We'll do that every line here.
And it looks like it's solidifying pretty instantly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This is 50-50 solder, which is a 50-50 mix of tin and lead. And that means that it solidifies quicker than a different mixture might. And it's just based on your preference of what you like to use for your pieces. But yeah, that solder really solidifies quickly for us. Okay, so I'm going to take these pins out. And like I was saying before, this is my favorite moment when you make stained glass, is being able to pick it up and kind of see with the light coming through what you have here. So that's basically the whole process. There's lots of little, framing and adding hooks, but we would just solder the other side and there you have it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you generally solder around that border as well? Or is that not necessary?
I would put a frame on this usually, and I can show you this piece here. So this has got a zinc frame on it. You can see it's a little bit thicker here, and it's got a copper finish. So I used an acid to turn those silver lines copper. You can see the difference here.
Oh, so is that a different solder or?
It's the same solder. We just use an acid to turn it that copper color.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And they make a black one as well. I'll show you the black here. So this is the black lines. You can turn your stain black as well. So
at what point would you do that? What part of the process?
After you wash this, you would then use the acid to change the color of the solder lines. And that's called putting a patina on the piece.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Let's see here. How difficult is it to fit curved pieces together?
So one step that we didn't see is the grinding machine, which is basically it's a diamond wheel that spins and it sands the edges of your glass. And depending on the pressure that you put on that piece, you can basically put a hole in your glass. So you can shape it however you like, kind of like it's just like sanding the glass down, but you can really change the shape of the piece with that grinder. So you can make them fit perfectly right next to each other that way.
Nice. And then you do the same thing with the copper, was it?
Yeah. So you'd wrap it the same way. Yeah, I can show you.
That's very cool.
Copper foil. And again, it comes, this is a thicker copper foil. I can show you. You would just wrap it the same way. This is our rondelle here. Center the glass on that tape and just wrap the edge of that glass. And just like that.
And you said the solder only sticks to the copper, not the glass. So is it pretty forgiving to work with? I mean, I assume you've got a lot of practice at it. But...
Yeah. So you can really go back. You can see what we just soldered. We can go back now and we can add to it and we can adjust it and we can remelt that. And we can, you can go back a million times. So with a piece, if you break a piece of glass in your piece, you can break it out and put a new piece of glass in and then resolder it into your larger piece.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
The copper foil changes the width of your lines as well. So if you want a finer look with finer lines, you could use a finer copper foil like this one here. This is the tiniest and this is the biggest that I have. You can see the difference in size there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So now that we've seen the copper, so you mentioned there was a difference between that type and like the Frank Lloyd Wright piece we looked at?
Yeah. 1 second. I'll just get the other piece of lead. I can show you.
I'll pull this image back up and kind of it's interesting now after seeing, how something like this is put together. Chris just asked me share if there are classes. I love to bring the Girl Scouts. We did have that link up there a minute ago for the Michigan Folk School. You can check that out, although there might not be any classes for a minute.
And we'll have a lot more classes next year and the following years. We're building a much bigger school building.
Nice.
Washtenaw County is actually taken over. We're in Washtenaw County Park, so they're playing a large role in our building and our growing, and we're just going to have a lot more available as time passes, and we just have more space that way.
Oh, great. So
this is lead cane, and this is what
I see.
The glass pieces fit between, and I can show you that. Your glass fits just right in there. Oops.
And then is that just directly soldered?
Yep, you would solder it at the corners.
Gotcha.
You would attach a piece would be here and here too.
Okay.
And that's not the type that I do, but there are a lot of artists still using that. It's architecturally more sound because you can cement, like glazing a window, you would basically shove cement into these seams and scrub it off and you'd have a nice strong window.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Great. Well, any last things to share from the studio, or any other insights or tips for people that might want to try this out? Are there other local resources? You mentioned the store in Lansing. We've mentioned the folk
Yeah.
school.
Merry-Go-Round Stained Glass. It's in Clinton Township, I believe, or Macomb, somewhere in Macomb County. Merry-Go-Round Stained Glass has a great resource for you. They sell lots of pretty glass, and I believe they have classes again. I know they shut down during COVID, but I think they started back up again. Um, they offer classes, and just the kindest folks there. And I believe that they can, for the person who had questions about restoring that glass that you found, they could probably help you with that as well. Delphi Glass in Lansing also has a huge resource center. They have a learning center in the store and the warehouse, and they're a great place to go as well.
Oh, that's great. Another group I work with just did a large mosaic, and I believe that's where we got most of the glass from.
Yeah,
Which is
exactly.
another technique that's similar, but also very different, using grout and,
Mhm.
a
Yeah, it uses the same tools. This is the Stained Glass Quarterly, the Stained Glass Association of America. They have a meetup in Toledo this summer. So if you're interested, they have a big convention this summer in Toledo, Stained Glass Association. They're one of the longest running print magazines that's still in print today. So that's pretty cool.
That's great. We had another question here. Any resources in Detroit? Not that any that I know of, other than these ones that kind of in the near suburbs. But
Yeah,
you're aware of?
know of at the moment, no.
But yeah, we will keep an eye out for that. I am
Mhm.
curious. Would you say, this is sort of a, it's a, I don't want to say antiquated, but it's a traditional technique. Would you say it's kind of seeing kind of like a uptick in popularity lately, or in the past few
Yeah.
years?
I found that since I've started stained glass, there was a lull. So there's a big dip in resources, and stores were closing left and right, especially during COVID.
Mhm.
I'd say 3 in the local area here were closed down and have not reopened. So it's important that we get this information out there, and we have more people asking for the supplies and the resources, and going to Delphi and asking for things that these companies have stopped making, because I think it can only get better from here. There's just so many more people interested, and I'm starting to see it come back, and that's great, because it going away just made things more expensive and harder to find.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's great. Yeah, I just pulled up. I'm like, I pulled up Delphi's site and the other my other window here, and I'm just like, it's very tempting to just look at all these beautiful glasses. I'm sure it's an amazing store to go at and just kind of.
And like we were showing with the pieces here in person, going there in person and seeing the glasses way different than seeing it on the website. You really can't tell what they look like unless you have them in your hand in front of you.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if that's it, I'm not seeing any more questions, but if anyone has any last comments. Oh, here's one question. Are these weather tight or for interior display only?
The pieces I make are for interior use only, but the leaded windows, the traditional cathedral windows, and the Frank Lloyd Wright windows, they are for exterior, because again, they're glazed with the cement that the copper foil doesn't have. It's possible to have the copper foil windows insulated and glazed between 2 pieces of clear glass, but that's not something I do personally, because I do focus more on the interior pieces, but they are watertight. They're just not waterproof.
Okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, if that is our last question, then I think we can sign off. But thank you so much, Gina. And we put up your Instagram and website, I believe, so folks can follow you and keep an eye out for any future classes, workshops, information. You also have beautiful pieces for sale on your website from time to time that are really lovely. So people should check that out and follow you for sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for chatting with us today. Really learned a lot. This was really great.
It was a pleasure and an honor, and I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, we will talk to you later. Thank you.
Bye.
And thank you all for joining and having questions and comments. and appreciating Gina's work. Hopefully you can make it down to the DIA and see some of our stained glass in person. As for this program, Thursdays at the museum. Next Thursday, we have, I just had it here. Next Thursday, we have Art/Pride, the works of LGBT artists in the DIA collection, part 1. That'll be June 9th at 1 o'clock. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.